Good morning. This week, the United Nations enacted the Declaration on Future Generations. And this historic declaration obliges all nations to govern as good ancestors, stewarding what we hold to be sacred now and forever. It offers a vital antidote to the cynical, short-term thinking that plagues the politics of too many countries. Canada endorsed the declaration, as our Prime Minister just affirmed to the General Assembly. And to support its implementation here at home, Generation Squeeze prepared the first ever report card of our federal government's commitment to generational fairness. There is good news and bad news. It is good news that our government has reorganized the entire national budget around the promise of fairness for every generation. That is a big reason why we did not assign any failing grades. The bad news is that there's still a lot of work to be done before Canada will earn excellent marks. Our lowest grade, a D, signals that the budget plan in Budget 2024 does not spend fairly on young and old alike. It proposes to grow old age security spending and spending on medical care for the aging population much, much, much faster than spending on the Canada Child Benefit, childcare, housing, and post-secondary. And if the Bloc Québécois gets its way, this indefensible age gap will only grow further, because the Bloc is threatening to hold the Trudeau government hostage to its demand to accelerate old age security spending so much faster that it will leave investments in younger people in its dust. Ottawa earns a C on our report card for its efforts to avoid leaving unpaid bills to younger and future generations. On one hand, Canada does have the best net debt to GDP ratio of any country in the G7, which is a strength. But we also have a structural mismatch between revenue and spending that is a result of poor planning for population aging, and that poor planning is causing directly our $40 billion federal deficit. Despite enacting the most comprehensive housing policy we have seen in decades, the government still only earns a C+ for its efforts to remedy the intergenerational tensions at the heart of our housing system. Our national housing plan still never mentions the word wealth. And as a result, it's ignoring how older Canadian homeowners, myself included, are getting wealthier as a result of the rising home prices that are inflicting unaffordability on younger people. Younger people deserve compensation for that. We award the Government of Canada a B for its efforts to steward the planet for younger and future generations. Now, Mr. Trudeau's government is the only government in the country that is standing up for the principle that if you make a mess, help clean it up. Consumers like me should be paying for the pollution that we make, because we need to pay for that pollution in order to reduce the mess we make and pay to clean up the mess after the fact. Otherwise, we betray our kids. And Canada earns its top grade, a B+, for organizing its budget around the promise of generational fairness. But we are not yet among the world's leaders in implementing the UN Declaration. Wales has a commissioner for future generations. The EU has a commissioner for intergenerational fairness. Canada needs one too. That means Canada needs an act to safeguard the well-being of present and future generations, because a single budget is not enough to disrupt the short-term thinking that seduces the present to colonize the future. Only by enshrining intergenerational fairness into the machinery of government will we truly safeguard what we hold to be sacred: a healthy childhood, a healthy home, a healthy planet. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned that you're giving them a B+ for promising generational fairness. Does this include the new mortgage changes and is this included in what you mean by generational fairness?
Yeah, so when we give the B+ for organizing the whole budget around this commitment to generational fairness, that's an effort to see how do we take that principle, like gender equality, like promoting equality between income groups, and then having intergenerational fairness also built into the machinery of government. It would be stronger if we just didn't have a single budget, but also had a minister responsible, a commissioner who would audit the government's progress, and an advisory board to guide cabinet. But when you think about housing, Here, the extension of mortgages is an understandable strategy to try and help a younger demographic that has been locked out of homeownership hack what is a broken system. But there's a fundamental tension between inviting people to borrow more to then bid up the price of housing, which then causes housing prices to rise, which then further harms those who follow in our footsteps. So what we need on the housing strategy in order to promote generational fairness is to have a clear commitment. We do not want housing prices to rise. Bake that into all housing legislation and goals, and then direct every policy tool to that end. And we need to find ways to support a younger demographic, to cover their rent, and to stretch into home ownership. But we also have to do so in ways that do not then continue to elevate the pressure on rising prices. And as interest rates drop further, the recent stall we've had over the last couple of years, which has actually been good years for housing, haven't gone up a lot in the last couple of years, but there's a real risk that it will kick into gear once again. And something like allowing us to borrow more, worse exacerbating that pressure. Risks exacerbating that pressure.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions on that.
I'm stuck here. What do you think? How do you think we got to this point where we got like this report card, like including the D, for example? What led to this point?
Yeah. So this D, this D would be earned likely, or an F might have been earned by any incumbent government. That's the problem with being in office right now. So whether you're Doug Ford in Ontario and you're running a $10 billion deficit, or you're David Eby in British Columbia running a $9 billion deficit, or you are Mr. Trudeau here in Ottawa running the $40 billion deficit, notice my nonpartisanship there, they are all dealing with a structural mismatch between how much we're needing to spend on old age security for our aging loved ones, as well as their medical care, and how governments decades ago simply did not plan adequately to collect the revenue that we knew was going to be required when baby boomers age. We call them a boom for a reason. And back in the mid-1990s, we do need to give credit to the Kershaw government that they saw this problem coming, and they did make the most significant adaptation. They improved the Canada Pension Plan, CPP, because they recognized if they didn't change how it was being funded, it could be bankrupt by the baby boom bulge retiring. So we did that in the mid-1990s. It involved increasing CPP premiums by 60%. The problem is the Kershaw government also had a plan to fix old age security. It was in the 97 budget, the 1998 budget, but by 1999 and 2000, it had gone the way, unfortunately, of the dodo. And so we have left old age security driving the very same pressures that we now see they were prevented in CPP. And then you have Mr. Blanchet. Mr. Blanchet right now, one, is wildly out of step with reading the actual numbers in the budget. Because I would encourage anybody to go to the outlook for expenses in Budget 2024. It is table A1.7. And it will show two things. One, this government is actually spending more to grow old age security than any previous government. Two, and even more importantly, it is growing old age security by more than any other budget line in the federal government. By a whopping magnitude. Old age security will grow by $104 billion over the next 5 years. Let's put that in context. The Canada Child Benefit will grow by $29 billion. $10 a day childcare, which is historic, hasn't been done in half a century, $15 billion. Housing, $6. Post-secondary, $5. And Mr. Blanchet says the budget has blatant discrimination against retirees. That's nonsense. The budget numbers, if you would only look at them, clearly demonstrate that this is a budget that is absolutely standing up for retirees, and more so than any other age group, and Canada should take pride about that. But I desperately, desperately hope that Mr. Trudeau will not feel held too hostage to this demand on October 29th, because if he does get seduced down that pathway in order just to maintain the confidence of the House, then this commitment to fairness for every generation will be much more of an empty slogan than actually a fundamental fiscal guardrail that can contain what we are spending in this country and distribute it evenly between young and old alike, so they get it right for my mom, her kids, her grandchildren, just the way that every family wants to budget for their kids, their grandchildren, and their grandparents. It's that intergenerational solidarity and love around our tables that we need to see in our federal politics, but Mr. Blanchet is actually undermining that love. I think he does. I'm going to give him credit that he doesn't mean to. But I don't understand why that party is not looking at Table A 1.7, the outlook for expenses, because there is no way they could make the claim that they are, had they looked at the numbers.
Last question, if you don't mind, how are you assessing overall, like, the actions that the current government is taking towards housing, including the latest actions? How far does this go towards your vision?
Yeah, so our visual is a little bit small up front here, but the one that is around housing, right, that one, back to the microphone, Paul, is a C+. And so there are two statements to be made to make meaning of that C+. First, this is a federal government that has implemented the most comprehensive policy on housing that we have seen in decades. There is really no denying that. And that is something that they can take credit on. At the same time, it hasn't been enough to restore housing affordability for a younger demographic. And I would argue that that's not because they haven't used a wide range of levers, but that we're still ignoring the elephant in the room, the hard truth. We've done what's easy when we can be angry at the other person over there who's the problem, the foreign buyer, the speculator, the NIMBY, the municipal bureaucrats who aren't acting urgently enough to build new supply, the money launderer. But that's allowing us to always be angry at somebody else as opposed to actually engaging with the harder truth that one reason we have tolerated home prices rising so darn much over the last, not just few years, but decades, is that older homeowners, myself included, I'm now 50, we've gained wealth. My own story is a story of gaining $1.5 million in the home in which I sleep and cook and watch television, which has returned more to me than has my pension as a pretty well-paid professor at the University of British Columbia. And that then signals why we are entangled in sometimes the hope that home prices will rise, because it benefits homeowners and they're planning for their retirement security, their wealth windfalls, etc. But that then means there is a diametric tension between protecting those quote-unquote nest eggs, which the Prime Minister has recently affirmed in a interview with a very sympathetic Gen Z interviewer, but then we don't offer some sort of compensation to younger demographics. We say, please, sacrifice your standard of living by enduring more housing unaffordability in order to protect the nest eggs and wealth gains of an older demographic. It's a lovely act of solidarity we're expecting on younger people's part, and it is hard. It is crushing the way that hard work pays off for them. But then we are not yet, and this is the problem with the national housing, we're not asking the older demographic, you have to have a stake in fixing this. And not just around your personal personal table at an intergenerational gathering where you might use some of the equity you've gained to help your kids and grandchildren. That helps your family, but it's not a policy solution. We need a policy solution that invites an older demographic, people like me, who have been benefiting, to say, how can we contribute more to both building deeply affordable housing, supporting younger folks in particular to access that, and then also trying to reduce other major costs in their lives like $10 a day childcare, accelerating funding for post-secondary, and those kinds of needs. We solve our wallet problems that way, not by axing a tax that's so fundamental to the vital well-being of our planet's systems on which younger folks are going to depend for their health and economic livelihoods. You know, we pay for our pollution so that we pollute less and we clean up our mess. And that is just so fundamental. We are getting misled when told that our affordability challenges are being driven by a price on pollution. The data show that that is not the case, that it's adding up less than 1 cent to every dollar we're spending on our major costs. And so we can solve our wallet problems without neglecting our climate problems. And I think that getting an A on resolving the intergenerational tensions in the housing system is part of solving our wallet problems. And we can do that without betraying our children by making sure we're also doing all that we can to meet our net 30 goals and get to net zero by 2050, which if we axe the consumer price on carbon, we're going to have so little chance to do. And that is a fundamental betrayal of our kids. And I desperately want to know why people who are proposing to restore affordability in a way that's not supported by the evidence and in a way that absolutely will betray our children.
With the looming election, how would you rate all opposition parties with the same criteria?
Yes, what a great question. This is not intended to be a partisan press release right now. But I do think that if we were to, there is no other There is no other government right now talking about integrating generational fairness into the machinery of government. So they would score lower on that theme. We don't have, is there any way to get that? We don't yet have any other party, but actually I think all of them are going to share a D, if not lower, on are we investing fairly between young and old? Like no one's willing to really tackle the elephant in the room about old age security, and absolutely Monsieur Blanchet and the Bloc Québécois, they get a fundamental F, and if I could give a lower, they should get a Z on this one. They are misreading the budget and driving inequality for young people in Quebec and then spreading that intergenerational inequity across the country. On housing, Mr. Poilievre has already said that he wants to overcome housing hell, rightly, by getting beyond the gatekeepers that are slowing adding density into the land already zoned for residents. Good idea. His challenge is that the Liberals have already done that with their accelerator fund, and so I want to know what next do you have, Mr. Poilievre, and I suspect he's good in analyzing the housing hell. And so I want to know what other good policy ideas he has to fix it, because that might get more to the intergenerational tension. Will he acknowledge that the younger folks he's attracted to the Conservative Party are having their standard of living eroded by the wealth windfalls that are being protected for an older demographic? What's his plan to take that on? I can't answer that quite yet, but I look forward to knowing his answer. The unpaid bills being left to younger and future generations. Well, I hear and applaud Mr. Poilievre's determination to fix the budget. And I think by that he means bring it back into balance. I want that too. I want that more urgently than I see in the Liberal government in many regards. But I don't think Mr. Poilievre yet has really articulated that the only way to do that in the short term is to have a hard conversation about old age security. Old age security and then medical care through the CHT for the aging population of boomers is driving over 80% of the deficit spending. So if Mr. Poilievre is wanting to balance the budget in the very near term, he has to have a hard conversation with more affluent boomers about how they're going to moderate, how they either contribute to those benefits that their generation is taking, or maybe some who are more affluent might take fewer of those benefits in order to bring it in. That's a conversation we need. If Mr. Poilievre can do that, then he goes from C up. And then I think and then stewarding the planet. No, this is the place here where I don't think there actually is another party in the country right now that is standing up for protecting the planet for younger people and future generations like the Liberals. And I will say in a nonpartisan way, just driven by the evidence, to anyone who's proposing a carbon tax election or accident tax, like, why are you expecting our children to pay dearly for pollution that your party is not willing to pay for today? I don't think people will write, pardon me, on our tombstones. I don't think people will write on our tombstones, I'm proud I didn't pay for my pollution. But we just might try to write, I'm proud to being a good ancestor. And right now, those wanting to fight a carbon tax election are not proposing to be good ancestors. They are proposing to betray our children. They are counting on us to do more, not less, to preserve the planet's vital signs, which increasingly the vital signs of the planet are showing they're on life support, but our kids depend on that planet for life support. And so that is the major risk of a quote-unquote carbon tax election. And yet there's still time for Mr. Poilievre to say, I want to help on affordability, and I want to stand up for the children of this country. Because I do think that's consistent with the family values he espouses. What worries me is that the next time a child is in her messy room and a parent walks in and says, clean up your mess, I'm not sure why the child says, why should I? Mr. Poilievre says, you don't need to clean up your pollution messes. Why should I clean up my bedroom? And I think that, it's my mom who drilled into me the family value that if you make a mess, bloody well clean it up. And I'm deeply, deeply concerned that Mr. Poilievre right now, whether intentionally or not, is undermining that family value from coast to coast to coast. Thank you.